should a crypto digital assets business think about regulatory risk? How will a retail crypto ban in Hong Kong affect the region? And what will the next fintech opportunities be in Asia and abroad? Welcome to Word on the Block, the series that takes a deeper dive into blockchain and the emerging technologies that shape our world at the intersection of business, politics, and economy. It's what we cover right here on Forkast.News. I'm Forecast Editor-in-Chief Angie Lau. Well, Hong Kong's proposed ban on retail investors from trading cryptocurrencies just wrapped its 3-month consultation period. It's now pending potential legislation for later on this year. So, what will happen to existing businesses and investors in Hong Kong? Does it shift the innovation dynamic in Asia? And what does it mean for the aspirations of blockchain and crypto firms like HashKey in Asia? Want to welcome Angelina Kwan. She's Chief Operating Officer and Chief Risk Manager of HashKey Group. And Angelina, it is great to welcome you on the show. I've been wanting to do this for a while.
Angie, it is really, really good to see you, and I'm glad you're looking fab as always and doing amazing things. So thank you very much for today. This is amazing.
We're thrilled. I mean, this is the first time you're actually speaking publicly since you started your role at HashKey, and I've known you for a while. Previous to this, you were the COO of BitMEX, and you bring a world of really regulatory compliance experience, almost a decade at the Securities and Futures Commission of Hong Kong. If I recall, previous to that, you spent a previous decade in the traditional finance and funds compliance industry. So you are well versed. And on top of that, as if you don't have enough spare time, you're doing your master's in law. So, so I know that you've been doing your studying. Um, Now, compliance. This is your neighborhood. This is what you do. How do you bring that expertise to this space that's needed more now than ever?
Well, it's such an exciting new space, and there are so many opportunities for traditional finance professionals to actually move in and contribute into the crypto digital assets industry. And to move this industry into a regulated space, which means adoption by all of the giant fund managers and regulated brokers, investment banks, and so on and so forth. So this is a natural progression for a very, very new and exciting area. And what you're seeing is you're seeing all the regulated companies now move into this space. And in the immortal words of our founder at HashKey, Dr. Shao, regulation is the only way to go and the only way to survive for new assets and emerging assets and adoption. So I think this is the way to go, and it's going to be very exciting. And it is already exciting. There are so many players that are moving into the space from traditional as well as original digital assets groups.
Well, I mean, it makes somebody like you with that wealth of experience enormously valuable, and so really happy to have that intellectual expertise here on the show. Let's talk about that. You know what's happening in the industry. You've been at the forefront of it over at BitMEX, and now you're doing that at HashKey. You're in a part of the world where it is accelerating at enormous speeds, and then you also come from SFC, from that regulatory experience. Do you how is Hong Kong shaping up in terms of how the SFC, how regulators are thinking about it, and against the backdrop of what has developed over the past couple of years in Hong Kong with crypto exchanges and investors really excited about new fintech and financial products.
So the SFC is a forerunner in that Ashley Alder, our CEO at the SFC, is the chairman of IOSCO. So Hong Kong is a leader in terms of whatever it does, it's going to shape the entire securities industry around the world because he is the chairman of the International Securities Organizations Commission. So basically a lot of people are looking to see what Hong Kong's doing. So they launched the virtual asset service provider license in late 2018, 2019. And there are a number of players that actually have lined up for it. And the first successful one was just licensed. We hope to be right behind them in terms of being the second one to be licensed. And what license means is it means adoption and being able to market to professional investors. It allows institutional players that are regulated around the world to be able to work with us because we will be on an equal footing with them in terms of being licensed. And that's really, really exciting. So the big investment banks around the world, the big hedge funds that are licensed, we will be able to work with them. And we think this is super exciting. And this is the biggest growth area. In terms of how Hong Kong is shaping up, it's been a amazing melting pot of different firms. And what you're seeing is you're seeing adoption in terms of an interest by the investing public to look into these areas. So you're seeing regulated products being created by other institutions, and we hope to be able to take part in that space because we've got a fund management arm, we've got an exchange that we're about to launch for professional investors, we've got trading that we're going to launch also. So we've got something for everybody at HashKey.
I mean, what are the hurdles that one must go through to get that license for a VASP?
Oh, it's really, really difficult in that the licensing requirements for a traditional firm has been, it's quite normal in terms of resiliency, policies and procedures, internal controls, making sure that you have procedures, onboarding, making sure that you know your client. So all of the traditional areas for people like us in financial services and traditional financial services, it's quite, I won't say simple, but it's the normal path. And I have to say, when I was at the SFC, I wrote those rules to do that. So we're just sort of following the rules that I sort of helped write or contribute to. So for traditional firms, it's quite interesting. But for crypto firms that wish to get into this, that were unregulated, they're going to have to rejigger their businesses and actually put in a lot more in terms of internal controls. They'll need to put in management and management structures, as well as putting in capital. So all of those requirements make it interesting and good for investors and protection for investors. You've seen some high profile problems in the space, and I think this is where the regulators are stepping in to actually regulate the space and make it a safer place for investors to invest.
I mean, we're just thinking about BitMEX as one of those examples. Was this something that you were conscious of while you were there?
Well, I was actually at the time brought in to actually help get them regulated. So that was my goal, and they're now moving towards that area, which is good, excellent, and I wish them well, which is good.
When you talk about the actual authorship at the SFC, you helped write a lot of these rules. What are the principles that you're trying to protect the market as you wrote some of these rules, including KYC and all of those internal controls? What exactly, in terms of the broader industry, trying to understand why these regulations were authored specifically like this? What are the principles that you're trying to protect?
So I did the KYC things were already there, and those are the standards that are followed by regulators around the world. But what at the time when I was at the SFC, we looked at how do we put a set of standards that exchanges from HKEX to SGX to London Stock Exchange could actually follow. What were the main areas that exchanges would need to focus on? So resiliency, procedures, capital, what are their backup plans, what happens if there are outages and things like that. So these were some of the areas that formed what became the automated trading services guidelines. And that has been the backbone of the virtual asset services provider's license in Hong Kong. So it gives a fantastic manual almost to anybody that wishes to get this kind of license. And there are other firms like traditional brokers that have gotten algorithmic trading licenses based on this background also. So it's a way and it's a path for people to follow to make sure that they are following best practice standards around the world. And I think Hong Kong standards are comparable to New York standards, which are comparable to international standards in Europe and around the world. And that's what we hope all regulators will adopt. And in fact, they have to actually work with each other. So if you're in Singapore and you follow the same procedures, then theoretically you could get licensed in Hong Kong, and with, of course, some regional differences, but basically a at least the minimum standard.
Yeah. But it is those regional differences that actually, really create a divergence here. A lot of local industry insiders fear that this is going to drive fintech talent out of Hong Kong to crypto friendly regions such as Singapore. Is that something that you're conscious of, that Hong Kong could cede a potential dominance or opportunity even?
I think Hong Kong has such a special place with the hinterland of China, and I think a lot of opportunity is here. And if we do well, Singapore does well. So I think there's so much sharing, and it's a case in point in terms of the bubble. We have a travel bubble forming between Singapore and Hong Kong. So yes, crypto players or digital asset players will go to Singapore, but they'll also try to get licenses in Hong Kong. So we're also pursuing our Payments and Service Act licenses in Singapore. So I think it just opens more opportunity in terms of in Singapore, you'd work with Southeast Asia, you'd work with Singaporean clients. In Hong Kong, you'd work with Hong Kong clients as well as Chinese clients, as well as Korea and Japan. And we're also trying to get licenses in Japan. So for virtual asset players, it just opens more and more opportunities. And if each city center does well, each country plays off of it. We have Thailand that also has a digital assets regime that's also been published, and that's quite exciting. And then you're seeing developments. You touched upon CBDC. You're seeing what's happening where there are ties between Hong Kong, Saudi Arabia, and Thailand to tie up in terms of trade. So countries are drawing closer together. So I won't say that everybody's going to run off to Singapore or everybody's going to run off to Hong Kong, but you're going to see different companies getting different licenses, and there are different opportunities opening up. We have 602 brokers in Hong Kong for professional investors. We have hedge funds. We have over 2,500 hedge funds here and funds in Hong Kong. We have 250 lawyers, law firms. We have 200 banks. So there's no end in terms of professional clients or accredited investors, if you call them. So it's really
Yeah.
quite.
The accredited investors require $1 million US minimum. That's 8 million Hong Kong dollars. Last report I saw was that's about 500,000 people here. So, okay, 500,000 people could potentially get access. But what about all those other retail investors who want to trade crypto? And and that market is now closed to them.
It's not closed, but in terms of for the license that we're trying to get, and there are ways and means that people can trade. They can trade through regulated entities that are in the United States. So you're seeing other United States firms set up in Asia. So it's borderless in terms of our trading. But what our focus is for HashKey is for the professional investor, institutional investor client. And we think that's an exciting space. And we think that we can help family offices, we can help sophisticated investors manage their funds and dip their toe into digital assets. And we think this is a very, very exciting area. And we believe there is more than enough business in that area. So we're focusing on that area first. And as I said, we're getting licenses in Singapore. So, and we're also getting licenses in Japan. So it's very, very exciting that we can open those opportunities too. So it's being aware of what is out there also. But our main focus and our headquarters are in Hong Kong.
Main focus, headquarters in Hong Kong with roots in China. Obviously, the founding team is there. How much of that goes into the also the forward thinking at HashKey to be set up in Hong Kong to effectively work in an international environment? What is the concept of or goal, perhaps, of how that can migrate internally into China and potentially grow there as well? Is there a notion of that, Angelina?
There is, but there are some constraints in terms of where the regulations are going in China. So our founder, Dr. Xiaofeng, who actually founded Bozera Asset Management, he actually had the foresight to think, hey, number one, regulation is the only way to go. Regulation and being regulated is the only way to survive for all products. And he started his early career as a regulator, also working at a stock exchange, at the Shenzhen Stock Exchange. So he had the foresight to set up this company almost 2+ years ago in Hong Kong. And it was his goal to set up a Asian region powerhouse to build a financial and digital assets group. And that's exactly what we've done. And we're following his blueprint in terms of expanding outwards. So, what we hope is to be able to set this all up for clients that are coming from China that settle in Hong Kong. We hope to be there to help them with their financial needs. We hope to help international investors. So many of our investments have been actually in Silicon Valley. We were early investors in some of our funds in Silicon Valley. And so bringing that choice to international investors and family offices has been a very, very big area. But shall we say, our parent group is so powerful in the area of blockchain. Now, that is very, very clear. And that is an aspiration of China to be a leader in blockchain. And that's an area where Wanxiang Blockchain, who is part of our parent company, that just dovetails in terms of the technology and working together with China and coordinating with them. So I can only see that there'll be more growth once we get our licenses, there'll be more growth in terms of how we can use what they're doing in China internationally, how we can actually bring our expertise out. So in the immortal words of Mr. Charles Lee, we're connecting China to the world and the world to China. I think this is Dr. Xiao's dream and vision, and we're trying to achieve that for him.
Yes, Charles Lee, the outgoing Hong Kong exchange chief, and now paving way for a new one. But certainly, it is that bridge that we often talk about. But when we think about just the expanse of the opportunity, I'm curious what you think in HashKey as you take a look at this landscape. DeFi is a huge uh, industry. I don't even the accelerant was certainly against the global economic backdrop. But when people can get into the DeFi space, we're seeing that growth in non fungible tokens as well. And I'm curious how you regard these new fintech financial vehicles that allow really the average person, whether you're accredited or not, to participate. I mean, would there be a road to growth in those areas for you at HashKey? Are you thinking about that, especially with your background as a compliance officer?
So I find this area fascinating personally. So I just read up on it and I try to take part. And where some of my friends bring me to these meetings, I try to learn like a sponge as much as possible. In the area of regulation, I think the regulators have not moved in, although I know the US is already looking at DeFi. In terms of our group, our capital entity, which looks at private investments and private equity, they're already studying this space, and I'm sure they've already even made investments. And I know that the group itself makes investments for itself. So we're already looking at that area and studying it. Now, what's going to happen in terms of the regulatory front and how they will start looking at it to a regulator, it's another product. So as long as they conform into the product regulations, if some of the DeFi companies do want to eventually get regulated and be able to serve the big funds and hedge funds that are regulated around the world, they're going to have to start fitting in and looking to meet with regulators around the world. So I think you're going to see these DeFi companies either they'll remain outside of regulation or they will actually submit to regulation. So it'll be the choice of those companies. For me personally, I just find it fascinating, and if possible, I'd like to learn even more and be a part of that. And I know that our capital group has given me the opportunity to look at some of these investments. So I'm studying it right now. It's very early for the regulators to look at that. But as long as they submit to the licensing application, they can go and get the license. In Singapore, with the Payments and Services Act license, it will probably be simpler for those companies to actually move that way first. And then as they grow out and get more customers, they can also submit to other jurisdictions licensing because the US is doing the same thing.
The licensing is critical for growth, obviously, because it allows the traditional and institutional monies that wouldn't come in otherwise,
Correct.
unless it's flirting on the side as as a independent individual, interested trade. But regulation obviously paves the way. But is there also then a divergence of safety
Yes.
that if this space is regulated only for the wealthy, what about everybody else? I mean, are we left to our own accord and caveat emptor?
Well, that's one of the reasons why, for me, you see, wherever I can, I try to teach. And I tell housewives, because of my work with the government, I try to teach investor education courses, or just go out to whoever will listen to me and tell them, look, if you don't understand this, do not buy into this industry. It is too nascent. The guardrails may not be there. So if you don't, and it's the same for stock too. I mean, if you don't know the company, don't invest in it. If you know what you're getting into, don't follow on gossip. Do your studies. And too many people just listen to gossip and don't do their own homework. So if you do your homework and do put in the time, then go ahead. And that's what the regulator has been saying to everyone in terms of this. And those are the guardrails the government has actually put in terms of Hong Kong that know what you're getting into. And we have an investor education center that does this to warn people about scams and or other areas. And our enforcement team in the SFC sends out teams to do inspections as well as mystery shopping. So for investors, yes, there is choice, and yes, you can go down, and it's almost like a rabbit hole. There's so much information out there. Trying to sift out what is right and what is wrong. I think you have to take the approach that if you're an institutional investor that's holding money on behalf of people and investing on behalf of people, you got to do the right thing to protect them. It's caveat emptor for those investors that want to take this risk because they can go in and deal through a regulated entity and buy products through a regulated entity and get the same exposure. I think that's where the SFC is really coming from in terms of first licensing institutions. So remember, credited investors are also institutions, and they will then look at their clientele to see who can actually purchase. So that's another area of focus. And then, of course, with this new ETF that's being mooted, you're going to also see more retail participation in a licensed and regulated crypto or digital asset ETF.
Do you envision more and more adoption and more acceptance from institutional investors? We've certainly seen the beginning of this avalanche, I predict. With Tesla just not even being the first micro strategy, all of these players now coming into this space. Do you see more and more of that? Are you hearing the demand? What's your sense of it?
I think the barometer when I sit down at a dinner table with people who are my peers who work in these big firms, they're all like, Angelina, this Bitcoin thing, I want to hear all about it. Tell me all about it. And like 3 out of 4 conversations start that way. So if you use the barometer of dinner with friends, everybody wants to learn what is Bitcoin, how to trade, what is it? Is it here to stay? What's my view on it? I think Bitcoin is here to stay. I went on record, and we, meaning HashKey, has gone out on record to publish a white paper called Institutional Investors in Digital Assets. So we've gone on record to say this is the way to go. This is going to be here. And if you don't invest in this asset as an institutional investor, you're missing out. And yes, it's very volatile, as all new investments are volatile. I think people forget about hedge funds. When I was at the
Hmm.
SFC, hedge funds were just debuting, and everybody's like, "Oh my God, hedge funds are going to eat our children, and they're so evil. Oh my God!" And guess what? They're part of the furniture now, and they're our biggest institutional investors now, and they're regulated and making money and doing great. So it's an understanding, it's adoption, and people getting to understand this will lead to overall adoption.
Yeah, I mean, what's happening in Asia is so fascinating. And what we're watching happening in this part of the world that sometimes the rest of the globe doesn't have visibility on is really mind blowing. I'm curious, Angelina, what are you monitoring here in Asia that you think the rest of the world should be conscious of as well?
I think I'm monitoring trends, and I'm monitoring that schools really need to ramp up their education in terms of STEM and tech. And with birth levels going down, I think we're going to see a huge lack of qualified people moving into this industry. The average age of financial services is actually going down. Sorry, the actual age is moving up, and there are not so many young people moving into this industry. So this is an area that I think all governments around the world need to start looking at in terms of educating young women and men and moving girls into STEM and really pushing education and pushing financial education outwards. This is a big area, and as you are aware, as a part of the Women's Foundation, that's been a key focus of getting girls equality. We need to move women into more into financial services and more into tech. There are very, very few women that are moving into digital assets, moving into this whole area around the world. And that's one area that we need to really move in. The other area that I would think globally we need to focus on is more clarity in terms of rules and regulations. So countries need to work together, and IOSCO is already working together. What used to be discussed in hallways is now being discussed in plenary sessions amongst governments. And there needs to be a lot more tie up in terms of rulemaking as well as enforcement. And COVID has really just put a damper on that. So I think governments around the world need to work together. And I'm so excited to see the CBDC. I also excited to see that China is launching in China, and they're already testing the CBDC. So this is a way for direct trade, direct payments to be made, and the costs hopefully will go down for eventually, hopefully for the end users. If you look at digital assets, the transfer of assets is cents on the dollar. And when you go to a traditional organization to do your electronic trades transfer, it's $200 Hong Kong. So if there's more adoption in this, it will be good for investors. It will be good for common people. It will be good for trade.
That is true. It always strikes me that in the age of technology that I would still have to pay, or really anybody would still have to pay 10, 20, up to 50 US dollars for global transfers. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a lot. Human capital, money, excitement. My three buzzwords.
No, it's why this industry continues to move forward at a pace faster than anyone can believe. You nailed it. Thank you, Angelina,
Thank you so
and
much.
thank you everyone for joining us on this latest episode of Word on the Block. I'm Forecast News editor in chief Angie Lau. Until the next time.